Good morning to everybody. It's a great pleasure to be here, despite of the fact that John couldn't make it for being here, at least online. I'm really sorry for him. I hope he's safe and hopefully can connect with us, because I think his presentation is really valuable for us, and having how they are struggling with these extreme weather events. In the age of climate change shocks. Happy to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me, in particular to Manuel, Salomon, Marta, and all the team of this project. I'm very happy to share one of my latest research, which is still a work in progress. It relates to the right to stay. For many years, I have been researching on climate migration from legal perspective. I may say that I'm a lawyer, so don't expect to have an empirical study, because our methodology is quite different from yours. So please, I beg your understanding. Anyway, we try to struggle with the emergence of new rights, trying to interpreting new rights. I'm an international lawyer, so I try to figure out how to develop new rights, new interpretations, new understanding, collecting all the empirical works that other researchers do in other fields. So I especially welcome this conference, because I learn a lot from all of you. So thank you so much for sharing all of your work. So as I mentioned today, I would like to try to present a relationship between ocean protection, human mobility, and what is increasingly being framed as the right to stay, in particular in the context of the small island developing states. Climate migration, according to the International Organization for Migration, refers to the movement of a person, of group of persons who predominantly, for reasons of sudden or progressive change in the environment due to climate change, are obliged to leave their habitual place of residence, or choose to do so either temporarily or permanently within a state or across an international borders. So as you can see, this is a very broad concept of climate migration, integrating internal displacement and international displacement, forced displacement, and voluntary displacement. All of them are integrating the so-called freedom of movement. So currently, all the researchers focus on climate migration. We use a new terminology, which is called mobility. Climate mobility is in plural, because it's a phenomenon which is really complex to understand, where many factors are overlapping, and each situation deserves to be highlighted, because at the end of the day, we are talking on human realities, human lives, but it must be reflected on human rights. The human rights has been a great successful movement in the earliest at the end of the 40s and last century, but has to be updated in the context of climate emergency. So is what we try to do so. As you can see, according to the Internal Displacement Monitoring Center, climate-induced mobilities are happening all over the world. According to the Internal Displacement Monitoring Center, in recent years, extreme disasters, many of them intensified by climate change, have generated more internal displacements than conflict and violence across across more than 150 countries around the world. Expose both sudden onset events such as storms, floods, and slow processes such as desertification or erosion. And also sea level rise, affecting in particular the small island states. And of course, these extreme events has produced many movements across different parts of the world, in particular what is so-called the Tropic of Chaos, which is the main area where the small island states are located. As you can see, this is just a part of the figure that this institution publish every year. But this data is only reflecting people moving internally without crossing international borders. It means that the burden is on the states to protect their own people displacing internally, covering all their needs, their basic needs, and sometimes covering mass population displacement, which sometimes in different contexts are really a great challenge. The ICP, sorry, according to IPCC report, all these movements relate to climate mobilities. According to the 6th report of IPCC report, could include adaptive migration, forced displacement, planned relocation, and immobility. That is why we use this new terminology related to climate mobilities. But of course, there is not a real consensus, at least at legal terms, in the sense that there is a huge legal gap at international level to protect people who are displaced crossing international borders, which is really relevant for these small island states that are facing these realities. Within this topical phenomenon, far less attention has been paid to those who remain, who has no possibilities to undertake a migration process, a mobility process. The situation of individuals and community who stay in place despite increasing climate risk remains underexplored, even though it raises critical questions about vulnerability, agency, and rights. But of course, this complexity has made quite difficult to have an international legal instrument to recognize and protect people fleeing internally or international as a seeker of international protection, since the convention, the Geneva Convention on the Refugee Status, doesn't cover disasters or climate change events as a factor of persecution. The Geneva Convention only covers political factors such as religion, race, nationality, belonging to a social particular group, or political opinion as a factor of persecution, and for that reasons crossing an international border. So currently we have an enormous gap, a legal enormous gap to cover and protect these people. Less, as I mentioned, for people who remain. Ocean states are often portrayed as small, vulnerable, and inevitably disappearing. They are considered as future-sinking states. We have to dismantle this narrative once again. This narrative is deeply misleading and needs to be challenged. They are not passive victims waiting to disappear. In fact, they are facing all the climate change shocks, as we've seen with John experience with this disaster, these extreme climate disasters. They are frontline defenders of the ocean, custodians of marine ecosystems, advocating of ambitious climate action. They have been real key players in international talks, in international climate talks. In fact, they have promoted these advisory opinions that maybe Pau will explain us regarding ITLOS, but they have been promoters, very important policymakers, but they are ignored. And they are not taken into consideration, despite they are really leading the climate agenda, the climate change agenda. And of course, they are called at international fora as a small island developing states, while they are large ocean states, according to some works published by University of Stanford and others, because their maritime territories regarding the exclusive economic zones are often vastly larger than their land area. This means that they are not small in geopolitical and ecological terms, and the label of developing can also obscure their agency, knowledge, and of course, systems and leadership in global environmental governance. Respecting ocean states' agency and collective self-determination is crucial. It's crucial not only for the future territorial loss, but also for the current exposure to climate change shocks. For example, Kiribati, which is located in the Pacific area, in the Pacific region. Its land, it's about 800 quadrat kilometers, while its exclusive economic zone is 3.5 million quadrat kilometers. So they are quite large ocean states. Part of the challenge, therefore, is to deconstruct these narratives and reframe how we understand these states, not as a passive victims, but as powerful ocean stewards with extensive territories and strategic importance. With this in mind, ocean states are home to around 65 million people. They represent less than 1% of the global population spread across more than 1,000 islands, mainly in the Caribbean, Pacific, Atlantic and Indian Ocean regions. Despite being small populations and mostly indigenous peoples, they play, as I mentioned, a crucial role in protecting some of the most biodiverse marine ecosystems on Earth. For these communities, the ocean is not just a natural resource. It's the foundation of their livelihoods, their food systems, their culture, and their identities. Their sovereignty is deeply tied to the ocean. Their economies depend on fisheries, traditional fisheries, sustainable fisheries, and marine biodiversity. And their cosmologies, their cultures are ocean-based. If climate change forces displacement, it is not only a migration issue. It is a transformation of ocean ocean governance. However, the same communities, as we have mentioned, are disproportionately affected by climate change. Sea level rise, coastal erosion, ocean warming are already transforming their environments. Between 1970 and 21 alone, ocean states suffered losses for about 153 billion US dollars due to the climate change shocks. So this is a great burden comparing to the size of their economies. And this is a question of, again, of climate justice. In this context, human mobility has become a central question. Migration has always been part of the island communities for many reasons, for social, economic reasons. Looking for new opportunities, it is a human right to do so. But today, even though more than 10 million people from these islands live abroad, many others are forced to move because of climate change, not because they are disappearing, are because they are at the front line of climate change effects and impacts. And they are experiencing loss and damages, and that they don't have capacities and financial support to cope with. And in addition to that, as we have seen with the Internal Displacement Monitoring Center data, the Internal Displacement Monitoring Center doesn't provide a clear data regarding how many people is forced to displace from these states crossing international borders. And also the International Organization for Migration has declared that it has no clear data how people has been forced so far to be moved beyond their lands. So, and this, of course, is a problem to highlight or to transform the reality into legal instruments at international level. But meanwhile, it's important to understand that the migration process, it is a huge effort for people who face these realities for many reasons, for many factors, but also it's equally important and often overlooked phenomenon is the one related to immobility. IPPC have recognized the reality of immobility so far. So that situation of people who remain in place despite facing an important or increasing environmental and climate risk. Immobility can take different forms, according to Fartoko and others. There is the dimension related to forced immobility, people that may want to live, but cannot, due to the lack of financial resources, personal capacities, legal barriers, or limited migration pathways. There is another dimension of immobility that is voluntary, regarding those people who consciously decide to remain in their territories because strong cultural, spiritual, and social ties to the land and to the ocean. So the sense of roots, the sense of community, the sense of belonging that makes to decide an important decision that is to remain despite of climate change impacts. So the question of the is particularly strong these states. Land is not a physical space, it is an ancestral reality. It defines identity, community, and nationhood. For many island communities, especially in the Pacific, leaving their land would represent lose not only their homes, but also their cultural heritage and collective memories. And this brings us again the concept to defend the concept of right to stay. as a human right, as a new human right. The right to state is increasingly being recognized. Recently, the advisory opinion of the Inter-American Court on Human Rights has recognized the right to state regarding the climate obligation of states worldwide. So it's a new dimension of the freedom to move, and it belongs to the right of freedom of movement and residence, already recognized within the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. But in the context of ocean states, the right to state goes further. It implies not only the freedom to remain, but also to claim the conditions that make staying possible. Staying possible in safe and dignity conditions. So it includes not only the right not to be forced to migrate or to be relocated, it includes also the right to guarantee the cultural identity and the right to a safe habitability. So this is the clear core material content of the right to stay. And in the case of ocean states, these rights are very important to guarantee the right to self-determination as a people and the right to permanent sovereignty over their natural resources and the right to cultural survival. Therefore, as I mentioned before, climate change for ocean states is not just an environmental problem, it is an existential problem. In this regard, rising sea levels or other climate change impacts are generating other legal and political problems. What happens to marine zones if land disappears? What happens to exclusive economic zones? What happens to statehood itself? What happens with populations without this territory? This is not already solved by international frameworks. Here again, the idea of ocean states become crucial regarding to climate justice. Even if within these scenarios, the right to state remains still important, even of this scenario. At the same time, also, there is a question or the necessity to not only to recognize the right to state, but also to promote all the procedural rights regarding the protection of the right to state. The right to state doesn't mean to ignore the climate change impacts or risk. The right to state, it means that the guarantee to remain until this ability can be protected by the state itself. And of course, and it is important to guarantee the voice of people to decide to be relocated in fully guaranteeing, for instance, the prior and informed consent. Also guarantee that this relocation will guarantee the cultural preservation. In this regard, there are not, as I mentioned, they are not really legal new advances in this regard, but we have new decisions from the Committee on Human Rights in the framework of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. In two mainly cases, one case is Virgili and others against Australia, and Pavai, the most recent decision from this committee last year, which for the very first time recognizes the right to state, not only as an adaptation measure, but also as a human right. It doesn't mention the right to state as a new human right, but it provides the legal foundations to develop this new right. I don't have time to develop these cases. I'm sorry about that. I didn't manage really good my time, but I will be happy to answer any question or comment that you may have. Thank you for your attention.
One or two questions.
Thank you very much, Susana, for the presentation. Interesting topic. And do you think that even though it's not binding, the 2020 decision by the United Nations Human Rights Committee in the case of INT-Iota, you know?
INT-Iota.
Yeah. Versus
I have
New
here.
Zealand.
I have here.
Yes.
America.
For me, it's important because I think it's opening up a new path in this matter, even though it's not binding. But I think it's important. What is your opinion about this matter in the context of international public law?
Yeah, thank you. It's quite relevant to make this question because it's the case of INT-Iota against New Zealand. Was a case decided by the Human Rights Committee on the within the framework of International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, and the very first time, this committee decided that in the future states will oblige to not to deport, not to return people who are in their territory when it's demonstrated that with the refoulement violates their human rights, because it could suppose to expose people to extreme and inhuman treatments. But this case was not in favor of INT-Iota, sorry. He is living right now in Kiribati under very hard conditions. But it was really a leading case, even if it's not advisory, even it's not a binding decision. It makes a very interpretative and authoritative decision regarding the context of Geneva Convention. Geneva Convention in Article 33 recognizes the principle of non-refoulement. It means that states cannot return people when it's demonstrated that with the returning they will expose to an ill treatment at the point that they can be murdered or can be exposed to very harmful effects like climate change right now. So it's an extensive interpretation. So for many years we have been struggling in a way to open up the Geneva Convention, to expand the refugee status, to cope new realities, for example, gender persecution and other forms of violation. They are not really covered by the Geneva Convention. But many scholars defend that it is possible to reinterpret the Geneva Convention to open up, for instance, because there is the concept of belonging to a particular social group. So this is a political factor, but if we expand this interpretation, we could be able to protect other peoples. For instance, communities in belonging to a social context, to a eco-social context, such as ocean states in the Pacific or Caribbean or Atlantic states region. So it's quite important. And thanks to this decision, many national courts in France, Germany, and Italy, if I remember well, they have cited this decision. So you can see, even it's not legally binding, it has been a very important and huge impact into domestic jurisdictions.
Online. Thank you very much for your interesting presentation. I would appreciate it if you could briefly repeat the cases you mentioned on the right to stay.
Yeah, well, there are several cases, but the most relevant ones, this decision do not refer to the right to state itself, but they are building up a new framework, a new legal interpretation of human rights, providing a new concept of adaptation, just reinforcing biocultural rights linked with land and nature. One is the Island Torres Strait, which is commonly known as Island Torres Strait case, but formally it's Billy and others against Australia case. And in this case, the other landers were claiming against Australia because Australia was omitting their obligations regarding to these communities because Australia didn't develop enough adaptive measures, didn't commit enough climate ambition in terms of mitigation. So because of that, because of these omissions, these people were disproportionately affected by different extreme weather events, different climate shocks, and these impacts were affecting the cultural and socio-economic rights as well. So for that reason, they initiated a legal suit against Australia at internal tribunals, and finally the case was decided against them. So this is why they promoted different levels and child promoted this climate litigation against Australia before the Human Rights Committee, and the Human Rights Committee decided in favor of these communities, saying that or declaring that climate change has a huge impact on cultural rights, and cultural rights are important to provide the adaptation measures, are part of the adaptation measures to provide a dignified and secure livelihoods. So this is very interesting because it's a cultural extension of the dimension of the human dimension of climate change. So at international level, the legal frameworks has been developed separately of human rights and the human dimension of climate change. So including climate justice perspective, considering that, for instance, these communities account less 1% of the greenhouse gas emissions so far. So it's a question who burdens the consequences, the causes and consequences of climate change. So these decisions are quite relevant at international level. And Pavai case decided last year is also related to Strait Torres Islanders as well, and was decided in favor of them. And the committee was reiterating the need to preserve cultural identities as a part of a resilience and justice, climate justice for them.
Thank you so much, Susana. You said you're an international lawyer. I'm just curious to know whether you have handled any case related to a right to stay or
related, sorry?
Whether you've handled any case or cases related to the right to stay. Somebody that's approached you on a
You mean if I've been involved or yeah. So I participate in several amicus curiae. One of the Inter-American Court on Human Rights, and now before the African Court on Human Rights. We had prepared, along with other scholars, amicus curiae, trying to push these new rights, not only the right to a stable climate, but also these new rights that we really convinced as lawyers that we have to advocate for these new rights. And and of course, we have been supporting different NGOs, in particular those working on migration people, migrants people. And in different levels I have been involved as far as I can. I try not to be just a theoretical scholar. I try to be involved in the real world because also it helps me to understand what I'm doing and try to contribute in somehow.
Well, I have a question too. Thank you very much, Susana. I don't know if you know if Australia or New Zealand are taking real steps in order to work with communities to face this problem, as I think it is really common to read in press, in media, even in literature, that these countries are implementing visa programs, but at the end, if you analyze these visa programs, the conditions are really strict. For example, it only applies for people up to 25 with a job agreement with this country. So at the end, they try to seek like forced work, but they are not really humanitarian visas for this climate migration. And how to communicate this that we are getting visas, but not for these reasons.
But by the way, there are several states in different parts of the world that they are starting to introducing these humanitarian visas because of climate change to protect these people. For instance, in Brazil, until now in Argentina, but they are rejecting many laws right now, as you know, in Mexico. But regarding to Australia and New Zealand, as far as I know, there are several memorandums of understanding, a kind of deals, an agreement between Kiribati, Vanuatu, and others ocean states with Australia and New Zealand, trying to develop not an humanitarian permit or a visa. It's more like a deal to receive people coming. We are dealing with a small group of people, you know. We are not dealing with a large population that will be displaced in the coming years. This is not, it is another narrative to deconstruct. So, and also because migration process is a very hard process and very expensive. Really expensive. So people crossing international borders are really few, little amount of people who do so. But in this case are really different because these ocean states, for instance, Kiribati are around 100,000 people spread in several atolls. The highest point is Tarawa del Sur, which is about 2 meters above the sea level. So we are counting just some people will be relocated. But first of all, the first phase is to relocate people within the territory, because they want to preserve their culture, they don't want to leave their land. In fact, Anote Tong was the former president of Kiribati, developed a new policy, migration with dignity. So he was really aware for the fact that in the coming years, their population should be relocated beyond the borders, the international borders, towards Australia or New Zealand. So he was really aware. So he put all the funds and the budget trying to develop all the capacities for their people, trying to be very attractive for Australia and New Zealand. And it was really a very interesting strategy, because from then Australia and New Zealand started to make these deals with Vanuatu, Kiribati, just accepting people in the coming years, but just a few numbers, not a really great number of people, but at least giving them a certain part of land and some place to live and some guarantees, really similar to the refugee status. But legally speaking, we are not able to use this term. Legally speaking, it doesn't exist, the term of climate refugees, but according to climate justice, I think it's a very relevant term to use. And it demonstrates that these policies are really convenient and response to the climate obligations in terms of climate justice. Australia and New Zealand are one of the most carbon measures worldwide. So they are historically responsible and accountable for the climate change impacts that these people are facing, these communities are facing. So it's fair. It's fair that they are at least receiving people from these countries, which are the closest to their territory. So this is what it is happening. But of course, in Latin America, there are several experiences at national policies developing different humanitarian permits, most of them temporary permits.
Thank you very much, Susana.
Thank you.